Hi, I'm John Reynolds, currently president of Scope 50. Scope was a project of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference in 1965. Dr. King had asked people to come south to help register black folks to register to vote. And we worked in all of the southern states, primarily all of the southern states, including the state of Alabama. And I was born and raised in Troy, Alabama, which is also the hometown of John Lewis. John and I went to the same high school, so he was sort of my mentor from afar. I had got out of high school, Troy State University refused to accept me because I was black, and I was in the midst of a summer program that was put on by the Tuskegee Institute, which is now Tuskegee University. And on my way home from this program, I saw this young white man talking to a woman, probably in her 50s, early 50s. And there was just something about his body language that said to me that he was not from Troy. And I stopped and waited for him to finish his conversation with this woman. And I dared to approach him and asked him if he was a civil rights worker. And lucky for me, he said yes. And so that was my entree, if you will, into the movement. I think for most black people, it was a difficult life, especially those folks who lived in the rural area and who worked on farms or on plantation. It was just difficult trying to make it through the day. For example, I worked in the fields from the age of 9 years old, from sun up to sundown. Many days or nights, my mother didn't have food in the house. So in some ways we relied upon her brother to provide us with food. And I think that was sort of the case for most people. In 1965, my grandmother couldn't go to a restaurant. She loved barbecue, and she had to order from outside the restaurant through a window. And that was the first instant for me, I think, that made me angry, and was able to see that there was something wrong. The other thing for me was the owner of the plantation that we lived on was in such a hurry to get us home and back to the field that he didn't wait for me to get on the truck. And he drove me for quite a distance. And that was the other thing that says something is not right here. So, and like I said, during this summer program at Tuskegee, I just saw this young white man, and that was sort of my entree. And fortunate for me, the project director of the Scope project, we became good friends and pals. And he thought that I had more that could be useful to the movement in general, and in particular my hometown. And he sent me to SCLC Citizenship Education Program, and I met Septima Clark at the Penn Center during that training program. And she also felt that there was something about me that was interesting. And so she called Dr. King and said, I have this young man and I would like for you to hire him. And I don't want him to go through the normal process. I want you to do it. And so we drove from the Penn Center once the program was over to Atlanta on a Saturday afternoon. I never will forget. And we drove to Atlanta and they put me up at the YMCA. And they said, you will meet Dr. King on Tuesday. And Tuesday morning, around 10:30, I was taken over to Ebenezer Baptist Church. And he was standing in the sanctuary, waiting for us. And that's how I met him. I went into this panic mode almost. I was in awe, obviously. He asked me two profound questions. Number one, did I believe in the philosophy of nonviolence? And could I be nonviolent? And I hadn't had that kind of question posed to me before. And I said, I think so. And I will give it a try. And his response was basically, okay, you can be on the SCLC staff if you learn about gunning. And the second question was I willing to die for the movement? And that was an easy question for me. I was clear that in my heart and soul that I was willing to sacrifice whatever it meant. I had given up my first car, a 56 Chevy, after about 5 months. And so if I was willing to give that up, it was easy to make the leap. Initially, I would go out and canvass neighborhoods, work with young people, try to get other young people to go out with me. And the job was to basically give out flyers. And as we did that, we began to realize that people couldn't read and they couldn't write. So one of the things that we did was to try to prepare people before they went to register to vote. So we asked them questions. We read them copies of the Constitution and stuff like that. And then we went to mass meeting. We had mass meeting in the county almost every night. Most of those was held at churches, if not churches, funeral homes, because they had the space that people could come. And as we went along, I sort of became Leon Guthers, who was the project director, deputy. And so he included me in all of the meetings that he had with the town folks. And so that's basically what I did. Well, I guess the most difficult thing was my father's reaction to being involved or getting involved. He almost whipped me to death. And And at that point, I didn't really understand why he was doing that. Later, I discovered that it was because of his fear of losing his job and losing everything that he had. So I was a threat to his livelihood, so to speak. That was the most difficult thing. I think the second thing was the first time that I spoke. I got up in front of a church full of folks. I never spoke publicly in my life. So I had to overcome my shyness, sort of there on the spot. And after that, I was pretty secure about what I could do and how I could serve and give. Scope 50 is a nonprofit organization primarily made up of those people who came south in 1965 at Dr. King's call to register people. I was asked, SCLC was asked if they would support us in having a reunion. And Bernard Lafayette, who was the chairman of the board of SCLC, said that he would support it if I do it. So I began to organize the reunion. And so we held a reunion in 2015. And those people who came to the reunion decided that they would like to band together, that they still had something to offer, that we could offer our skill to a new generation and organizations out there. So, and they asked if I would lead that effort, and I said yes, and here we are 5-6 years later. And my experience was very interesting, particularly since I was involved in my own hometown, and so publicly so that I had this sort of weird reaction. Most black people who knew me sort of, supported me and sort of whispered who I was and, stuff like that. But the white community, they didn't know that I was from Troy. They just assumed, since I was so public involved, that I couldn't be from Troy. And so they just assumed that I was an outsider, if you will. Because if you remember, John Lewis, for example, like I said, came before me, didn't do any of the activities in Troy. He was 100 miles away. So a few years later, I went back and the probate judge said to me, if we had realized that you were from Troy, you would be dead. And I said, I know. And so that was what was fortunate for me. This 56 Chevy that I talked about a minute ago had Florida plates on it. So when I was first stopped and arrested, it had Florida plate. And I think because of that, they just assumed again, and they didn't pay attention when they took me to jail what my address was. So that was the immediate reaction in my hometown. Outside of my hometown, white folks didn't care who I was. They just wanted me gone. It totally changed my life. If I hadn't went through 1965, I could honestly say that I wouldn't be here today. I can honestly say that I would either be in jail or dead. Because I had a temple, when I started growing up. And I would let it explode from time to time. And just the kind of stuff that I was into as a kid, I was hanging out with the wrong folks. My basically social life was going to cafes and dancing for money, stuff like that. So the Scope Project just totally changed my life and who I became, and it opened the world to me. A few minutes ago I said that Leon and I became friends, but it was more than that. When my father disowned me, he said, "I'll be your father," and he have been. So without Scope and the teaching that I learned from Dr. King, I wouldn't be here. First of all, I want to say thank you for believing in me, trusting me, particularly with your family. And I would say that I'm sad that you're not here. I will never forget you. But I'm also disappointed that your dream have not become a reality yet. I'm particularly saddened by the kind of violence that is taking place in this society and other societies around the world. But I will continue to try to do my part as long as I'm here. I love going to school and speaking to kids in school. I think that that's is important. And I think one of the things that most folks don't know is how important young people was to the movement in Birmingham and Selma. Particularly in Birmingham, it was high school students who pretty much drove that movement. And I believe that young people are willing to listen, to learn, and act, on their understanding. So I love going into school, and particularly with 6th and 7th grade kids, and just seeing their mind, come alive, so I think it's very important that that we talk to young people and share our stories with them. And that's actually one of the things that hopefully Scope 50 is going to be doing forward, is talking to young people and going into schools, and because they need to hear from us. I think in this country, too many people sacrificed, shed their blood, and gave their life for the right to vote. I always mention Valerie Delujo, who gave her life on Highway 80, getting people from Selma to Montgomery so that black folks would have the right to vote. So I cannot personally forget her sacrifice. So I have to vote. I said to somebody, our group a couple of days ago, I don't care who folks vote for and why, but they have to vote. And so, and I said to them, vote for your dog, I don't care. But you have to vote. Because voting bring about change. It changed lives. It changed policy. It makes a difference in the world. So more numbers that you put up on the board, that affect a lot of different things that people don't realize. So if a certain population votes 60 or 70%, I mean that's a big thing. And sometimes you have to vote not necessarily in your interest. The Senate race in Alabama was a perfect example. People didn't vote necessarily for the candidate, but they voted because they saw that he could help change their life more so than this opponent. It's sort of a difficult question for me. I would probably say 1966 in Chicago when Dr. King was being hit with a rock. I think that's the image that I want to focus on and sort of keep alive. Because that signified for me his willingness to sacrifice, to give up everything in order to make change in this country. And we all know that he did. He gave up his life working with sanitation workers. I don't think that you could humble yourself any more than that. So just that image of that rock hitting him in the forehead just keeps me going, I think.